Exactly. And God knows this, right? Because again, you go back to Genesis 9, right? Noah gets off the ark, and the first prohibition is do not drink blood, right? That's the first thing God tells Noah not to do. Yeah, do not drink blood, because the life is therein. So isn't that interesting? Because he's just coming out of being around how many millions of Nephilim giants who are drinking blood, right? So I think, yeah, they of course, they have higher science, they have higher mathematics, higher, architecture, all those things, right? We're it's almost like, if you think about it, it's like the fourth dimension, right? Each lower dimension is, like you said it echoes. I see it as like a shadow, right? Like our shadow is just a two-dimensional version of ourselves. And I believe that we, in the realm now, we are the shadow of the supernatural realm.
All right, welcome back to Blurry Creatures. We're going back old school. We're going, we talk a lot about the golden age, and we talk a lot about, sort of this what happened in the beginning. But then every once in a while, Luke, we've been getting into things like this modern phenomenon, weird things like cattle mutilations. We haven't really talked about it. Crop circles, UFO sightings, Bigfoot sightings, all these things that are happening present day. What are the paranormal things that are happening today? A lot of farmers will say that, select number of their cattle go missing, and then they'll come back and they'll be drained, as if somebody just took them inside, some sort of lab, and just sucked their blood out of it and then put it back perfectly. And then it's untouched. Nobody leaves it. Nothing's eating on it. It's like this crazy phenomenon that's happening all over the place. So we've talked to a few guys here and there, but we're gonna go into depth with Ryan Pitterson today, author and researcher, and kind of what has he discovered.
It's great to have Ryan back. He was on episode 18. So we go way back in Time Machine. This will be his fourth appearance. Ryan's a great guy, written some amazing books on the Nephilim, and you've been a great friend of the show. And as you said, this is a really interesting topic. I mean, this is something that we're seeing in pop culture. There was, even this year, there was a mass cattle mutilation in Texas. There was an episode on Skinwalker Ranch, which dealt directly with a cattle mutilation and then the carcass not being touched. So a lot of weird things around very surgical removal of body parts, no blood, and trying to make sense of what's happening here. And Ryan has spoken on this topic and done a bunch of research. He's a preeminent researcher. He, being an author and a writer, he does a ton of work looking into stuff, and so we're very excited to have Ryan back in the Blurryverse, and to talk about one of those fascinating things that's happening here and now that really doesn't make a lot of sense. Law enforcement really can't make heads or tails of this, because it's so bizarre, and yet it seems so meticulous. It doesn't seem like an animal attack. It doesn't seem like, unless you have a surgeon with a plasma cutter or a laser, or it's out there with a scalpel taking apart an animal in the middle of nowhere, it just doesn't make sense. And I think the crop circle thing is a very good analogy to what we're going to be talking about today, because in the same way that some of the things that are created in crops, and we did an episode on that about what's happening in the UK specifically, are so intricate and so bizarre, and they happen overnight, that it's really tough to make sort of a conventional conclusion.
It happens all over the world. I mean, you have cases in New Zealand, the UK, here in the United States, and rural areas where people aren't. I mean, you got to think about this. This is people's livelihood. I mean, if you have land and you have some cows on it, I mean, they're not cheap. They're expensive, and to have them go missing, have them get eaten. I mean, you spend all your time and energy trying to protect these things, and then losing 5-6 cows is thousands of dollars. 10 grand, 15 grand for these animals. So it's really sad. And it's not like someone's gonna be playing a hoax in small town Texas. Right. It just doesn't make any sense. So let's get Ryan on this one. If you're not a member of the show and you want to support what Luke and I are doing here at blurrycreatures.com/members, come on down. We got a lot of bonus perks for you to sponsor the show. We got events coming up this next year, and you can get tickets to those early. You can chat with us and hop into some of our exclusive channels like Facebook, Discord, Telegram, etc. So come on in, right? Hair tips. Sometimes we'll give you those on the Facebook.
Hair tips.
Beer.
All the above, Nate.
All the above. But Ryan's one of our favorites, and I'm excited to get back on. We need a pre-show slogan.
So the Bone Zone doesn't really work today, Nate. Let's let the juice loose, huh?
Let's let the juice loose. There you go. All right.
Okay.
I like that.
It works. It's a good meeting. Good meeting of the minds.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
Enjoy the journey.
The Smithsonian, if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
This is the opposite. All right, well, let's get into it. Welcome back to the podcast, Ryan Pitterson, author, researcher. You're doing a ton of things. Obviously, your Judgment of the Nephilim book is sort of how you came onto the scene in the Nephilim and talking about all these weird things. I like your shirt. Ask me about the Nephilim. Luke and I started a podcast about the Nephilim, and little did we know how crazy it would get. I've got a basement full of Camp Nephilim shirts. We've been shipping merch like crazy for Black Friday, and welcome back to the podcast. I got to get one of those shirts is what I wanted to say. Yeah. But you've been on this is our fourth time back on the show, back on Blurry Creatures. And by now, Luke and I know a little bit more than we did when we started the show. So, we've talked to everyone in this space just about, and we've always enjoy having people come back on because it feels like developing more of a friendship and a relationship, and we can kind of just have fun, tell some jokes, and just do what we do on Blurry Creatures, which Luke and I don't really take ourselves too serious, but I know all the researchers do, and you guys are hard at work all the time, so we appreciate you coming on our show, giving us a little insight into what you've been discovering. And today we were kicking around the idea of talking about cattle mutilations, and it's this strange thing that happens. So we talked to a few guests off the cuff. David Politis, we talked about elk, how these UFOs are out and taking elk, and like sometimes sort of like a tractor beam, like sucking them up into the ship, and then and it's just these bizarre stories we hear of like, okay, if this extraterrestrial phenomenon is going on, this UFO phenomenon is going on, why are they taking animals? And then we talked to a cop who went on to a bunch of calls in Colorado, who was showing up, and these things are like, it's just bones and skin, and they're like sucked dry, and they're just laying there. And then a couple times it looked as though they were like embedded into the ground, as if something dropped them from some crazy height, and they're dead, but they're on the ground. But there's no you would think that this thing would be sort of exploded all over the place, but it's not. So some really interesting things. Welcome back to the show.
No, and I want to say, Ryan, that like one of the things that I know you talked about this, and you actually presented at Prophecy Watchers and with some of our friends, namely Derek Gilbert and Sharon, who we've got to become pretty good friends with Derek. But fascinating phenomena, and I know that there are a lot of connections. People make a lot of connections to UFOs. Not exactly sure. In some ways, we don't really know what's going on, right? I know that a lot of this phenomenon is not new, but it really come to light. And I think some of it is Skinwalker Ranch, right? The show Skinwalker Ranch actually has had a few of these things that happen. And what you get is bizarre stuff like tongues removed, like surgical cuts, like, naughty parts. I don't know how else to say this. I think it used to be like you tell your kids, don't hit dad in the swimsuit area, right? Like that's no, but there's really bizarre things that are happening, and there's an absence of blood, and this is not just like on Skinwalker Ranch. This is not just in these one-off cases with Politis or whoever. This is kind of a crazy phenomenon where people, ranchers especially, who are not ufologists or cryptozoologists or researchers, are having these bizarre mutilations. In fact, sometimes surgical mutilations of their livestock. Most situations we can't make really heads or tails of what's going on. That's why I was excited to have you on. And we've been tackling some topics, I think, in the last, we were just joking before the pre-roll. I think the last time we had you on was almost 100 episodes ago. And there's a few things that Nate and I have done the last, 20, 30 episodes. We did one on crop circles, for example. There's just very specific about some of these weird phenomena that become somewhat mainstream as far as the awareness of it. But when you get into the nuts and bolts of what's going on, like there's very few people that have really looked into this and delved into this and done the research. And so grateful to have you on, and really interested to hear your thoughts on this and perhaps its connection to the UFO UAP phenomena and sort of what you've dug up, because I know that in your free time, these are the things you get into. We were just talking about how you're gonna wrap up the corporate world here and really dive into the things that you love to do. And I'm going to let you go. Ryan Pitterson, welcome back to Blurry Creatures. It's grateful to have you. Your fourth time. The old silver sombreros, we were saying, like I think it was the 80s or 90s. We used to, there was this, I don't remember, we're West Coast kids, so we grew up, and I was probably watching the Giants or A's, but there's an announcer who, if you struck out 4 times, you got the silver sombrero. In this case, you're not striking out. You're hitting home runs. So this is some ways you're batting for the cycle, because great to have you back. But enough of these guys yakking.
No, it's all good. It's all
good.
Yeah, great to be back on, honestly. And and not only is it my 4th time for the silver sombrero for the cycle, I'm also, I'd say, now that you guys, first of all, congratulations on getting over 200 episodes. It's just absolutely amazing. And man, I was listening to tons of your content, just leading up in the last couple of weeks. I can't believe that I was actually, my first episode was episode 18.
Let's go, bro. You are an OG.
Thank you. Hey, there you go. I am flexing my OG status.
You caped up and took us for a ride early on. I loved it.
Yeah. So I'm just, honestly, it's mind blowing. When you see how you can go from 18 to 207, but also just the impact that you guys have had. Because for me, when you talk about conferences, I was really impacted. Dr. Michael Heiser, of course, passed away early this year. And, I actually didn't know him. I knew him how everyone else knew him. We never were at the same conference or event. But it was funny, I spoke to many authors and speakers, of course, about him. We're emailing, talking, saying how it's so sad to lose him. And then, there was one, I was at a conference, and there was one speaker who said, he said, it's sad. He goes, yeah, it's sad. He said, but another generation has to step in. Yeah. He goes, he said, and I say that because I can remember when I started going to conferences and people say, hey, yeah, I got into the Nephilim from L.A. Marzulli, or I got into the Nephilim from Gary Stearman. And that's what led me into this. I started researching all this stuff and UFOs and aliens. And the last conference I was at, which is in Norman, Oklahoma, with Prophecy Watchers, there were so many people who said they got into the Nephilim because of Blurry Creatures. Yeah. And so it's like almost like I see the baton being passed, even how we're connecting other people who are all new to this content. So that's definitely a testament to the success you guys had and how much God has blessed you. So, so hats off to you. And I'm glad you guys like the shirt, by the way. So this shirt is my wonderful wife, Erica, designed this shirt. And it is completely Blurry inspired. She said, she was saying to me, like, we got to get more shirts because she loves all your content, all your merch. And she said, I want you to get a new shirt. And so she had this idea, and she goes, what do you think? I said, I love it. It says, of course, it's on it for those who are listening on the podcast, it says, ask me about the Nephilim on it. And then on the back, I got the QR code here.
There you are.
So you scan that, it takes you right to a 2-minute video, a very basic primer on the Nephilim given by me. And so, it's a good conversation starter and a way to
love that.
Get a little blurry on the road.
It's hard to get through town now because everyone's asking you about the Nephilim.
I actually debuted it at the Prophecy Watchers conference in Norman, and I had to go to Target to pick up some equipment for the computer. And people were stopping me left and right and scanning my back.
Hey, Ryan, is it weird people ask you to turn around and take a photo? You're like, man.
Yeah, it's my best side.
Can't be skipping leg day in those squats, right?
And if you take like 3 hours to go to the grocery store, you have an excuse.
No question.
Now, right?
No question.
It only took me 20 minutes, but everyone kept asking me about the Nephilim, honey. I don't know.
But also, I've actually already gotten lots of good DMs from people who have the shirt and said, "Hey, it works." I got to speak to people, and it's a great way to share it. So it's been fun. Awesome. My goal is by next year for someone to tell me they got married from the shirt. They're like, I was walking and someone stopped me. We got into a conversation. She was a Christian. I'm a Christian. And here we go. So, but that was really, you guys were a big role in that. So I will absolutely hook you guys up.
There's hope though. There's hope for that. We actually had our Blurry wedding this year. So two folks.
There you go. See, there you go.
Met the Blurry. So you know what? You're on the right path, man. Nothing like the Nephilim. Nothing like the Nephilim to inspire some nuptials, right?
Exactly.
I love it.
Exactly. So yeah. So
Now we're talking about cattle mutilation.
Yes, let's go from love and marriage to right to cattle mutilation. Seamless transition.
That's how the song. That's how Sinatra did the song too, right? I mean, it's exactly how it went.
Exactly.
Love and marriage. They go to get like a horse and carriage. It's that horse just happened to be mutilated. Well, yeah.
Okay, maybe you're right. I see where you're going with that.
I was with you, Luke.
Thank you, Ryan.
I knew where you were going
Thank you, Ryan. I thought Nate would get that of all people. He's a music guy. But all right, Ryan, let's go. Drop it on us here.
Yeah, so cattle mutilations, right? So for me, obviously, when we look, this is a phenomenon. It's been around, really going back to the 1800s. And I've found some articles and journal entries, like in different, journals and like academic journal entries, in Ireland and in England, talking about this phenomenon and attributing it to some supernatural cause. And so for me, I'm always trying to see how does this link to the spirit realm and into scripture. And I think there are two things that we underestimate the impact of that are in the Bible and also in our society today in terms of the spiritual power behind them. And those two things I think are music and blood. Right. I think but we're going to eventually find out in eternity that there's a great spiritual power behind music. And certainly the Bible tells us over and over about blood, and that of course, in Leviticus 17, God says the life is in the blood. And I think when we think about the cattle mutilations and what's happening here, where you already mentioned the precision, we just had a case in Texas earlier this year in Madison County where 6 cattle were mutilated. And like you said, these are just farmers. It's a farming couple. They actually showed the photos of where their reproductive organs are removed from the cow and the blood is being drained from it. And the whole, they said, and this is the farmer's own words. It says it looks like the cattle was cut with a laser. And it just turned out that the husband in this couple was actually, in addition to being a farmer, is actually an animal surgeon. So this is someone who's very familiar with cutting open animals, dissecting animals in a proper way. So what's happening here? And so what kind of piqued my interest is this whole idea of, right, we see, of course, once we hit the Mosaic law, that the importance of blood and blood sacrifice, specifically blood being drained, right? God doesn't just say, okay, there's very specific instructions on how an animal, a sacrificial animal was to be cut and then have its blood drained to be offered to God. And so is there a power there? I think yes. And even the idea that it has to be animals, right? I think what the angelic realm, the fallen angelic realm is doing is that, right? Animals were used until Christ, until the ultimate sacrifice. So I think God has set up this principle that their blood can be used as it was used for thousands of years in the Old Testament. And so I think that's the angelic realm is drawing on some power by these mutilations. And again, you can go to Texas. Again, there was you mentioned Colorado, where there was a major investigation in the 70s, and one article I found, a clipping from 1977, was from a local government commissioned investigation in Colorado, and the article actually, where they had dozens of cattle mutilated in this fashion. Sometimes the tongues are removed, the eyes are removed, always the reproductive organs, and blood draining. And even in their report, they were referencing the Bible and saying this is connected to Bible prophecy. So I think that's where that there is some type of untapped power that when blood is being used, and then you tie it in, of course, to Genesis 6 in the days of Noah, the idea of manipulation, reproductive organs and blood. I think that's kind of what got me really kind of excited to look into this even further.
Here's a question for you. Like, I know that you just have like a generic Christian background. You kind of think some of the explanations growing up, there had to be like some perfect animal to be a sacrifice. And when you say music too, I think about there's this deeper meaning to it, because what Luke and I have kind of stumbled into is they knew things about harmonics and resonation and
frequency.
Sort of what is it? Frequencies. Yeah. It's not just, music gets you moving, gets you going. It can be seductive. And it's not just like blood is, we just need a sacrifice because that's just how the ancients did it. It seems as there's something even deeper here when it comes to frequencies and music, and when it comes to blood and the life. And what do you think that is? Is this like some sort of spiritual law in heaven where blood is like their understanding of it is different than ours? Maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
Perhaps.
Right. And so I think that, even when God says, to Moses that the blood will be a covering of your sin, right? It's covering your immorality. That's a spiritual concept, right? So I do think exactly what you said, that there are laws and principles in heaven regarding blood, just like music, right? And I think there's something to that with vibrations and frequencies. And I think, going back to episode 18, right, with Judgment of the Nephilim, where I talk about the first family of the Nephilim, I believe that even the creation of instruments, which came to Lamech's family in Genesis 4, Jubal, his son, I think that came from the fallen angels. I think that was given from the sons of God, the knowledge of creating instruments and that to begin with. And then like you go to King David before he was king, when he was a boy, but was assigned to now live with Saul and is a part of his kingdom. And Saul was possessed by a spirit, and David played music to remove a spirit. I mean, that to me is the Bible is clearly telling us there is a supernatural power and property to musical vibrations and frequencies. A spirit left Saul when David played music. So there's something much deeper going on there. I think the same thing applies to the blood. And that's why we see this consistent connection of cattle mutilation, the draining of blood, UFO, alien phenomenon. I think it's all tied back to God's original principle that there's a power. Because if you think about it too, and it's funny too that you mentioned earlier the tractor beam, right? The idea that this, lifting things up. There's an interesting passage in Judges 13, right? Judges 13 is all about Samson. When the angel comes and tells his parents, you're going to have a son, he's a baby, he's going to have special powers, don't cut his hair, don't let him touch something dead, don't let him drink wine. He gives them all these Nazarite vows to take. First the angel appears to his mother, and she tells her husband, and he doesn't believe her. And then it shows up again, and they make a sacrifice. But the interesting thing, it's the only time in the Bible where it says the flame came from the altar and went up to heaven. Like normally you see a sacrifice when the temple is being inaugurated by Solomon, God will send a flame down to consume a sacrifice. This went up to heaven for the blood sacrifice. And it says the angel went up to heaven in the flame, almost like a tractor beam. Wow. Like he said, it literally says it went up in the flame. So again, I think that was, I believe, the use of the blood caused this supernatural, what I would call an opening, right? It pierced the veil, right? The blood allowed the veil between the human realm and the spirit realm to be pierced right in front of their eyes. And then, of course, what happens? Manoah, Samson's dad, says, "Oh yeah, now I definitely believe." Yeah, he said, "Yeah, this is all going to happen, right?" Because God, there was a divine manifestation right before their eyes once they put that blood on the altar.
Ryan, I want to point out too something that I was thinking is that for us as Christians, right, Christ is that final sacrifice, the lamb that was slain, right? But for Jews that still practice, there's this coming time when they believe the temple will be rebuilt and they will resume sacrifices. So this thing hasn't stopped. And also the occult, as we know, is super, super focused on blood, whether it be things like Jim Caviezel talking about adrenochrome and the harvesting of that, which is of course labeled as conspiracy theory by everyone out there, but there seems to be way too much of that going on. And then also we know that practices in witchcraft especially involve animal sacrifice and the letting of blood. So while this may have stopped for the followers of Christ when Christ was the ultimate and final sacrifice, the principle of this has not, right? Like there are many practices that still believe in the power of spilling, letting, consuming, whatever it be, blood in order for the Jews to see atonement of sins in the same way that we see in the Mosaic law. And for the occult, it's part ritual rite for, to access. And we know that also, having spoken to enough people that came out of the occult, like Nate and some of our interviews with these ex-witches, that the blood sacrifices are actually the ones where you level up in power. That's where you actually are able to, I don't know how to do more. If you stack them.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. The Black Mass, right, often involves a blood sacrifice, a blood ritual. You can, again, going back to Leviticus, right? Blood's mentioned a ton in Leviticus, but there's one passage where God specifically says, "Ye drink blood and ye worship idols." So God connects that consuming of blood to again, worshiping the fallen angels, worshiping demonic spirits. So in the cult side, it's definitely still a big part of witchcraft, of Wicca, of the occult, whether it's Aleister Crowley or all these rituals where blood is integral. Because again, sadly, a lot of times the occult side of society is more in tune with what's really happening in the spirit realm, and they're doing these things and using the blood of animals, and unfortunately sometimes the blood of humans, because they're trying to, again, unlock. I believe it has a property that is unlocking, allowing access into the spirit realm.
Do you think that they are drinking the cattles and eating parts of it? Like, because I mean, we've heard this, humans do this, right? I mean, there's all these conspiracy theories floating around in the air. They're taking blood, they're taking parts of humans, and they're almost turning them into like drugs and consuming these things. Like extraterrestrial beings are doing the same thing.
Kind of assuming this is. I mean, do we jump ahead a little bit, Ryan? As far as Nate assuming this is extraterrestrial activity? Because I mean,
I think where we are, right? I think we've been on a case for the last 60, 70 episodes to say, look, I mean, these are not like crop circles are real. Something is making them. It's not a hoax. They're not all of them are hoaxed, and there's something's flying these craft around. I think it's safe to assume that there are government hoaxes and there are deceptions, but there's absolutely a phenomenon that's happening here, and all these things are associated with it. So that's where my mind goes right away.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm just I don't know if we're jumping ahead on Ryan's research. Go back to the 1800s, and we started talking about, as it would be a surgeon, an animal surgeon that ends up having this on his ranch, right? And so, as you dove into all this research and sort of started pulling these threads and following these trails, Ryan, what are you finding? Like, what sort of similarities, and what conclusions do you start drawing? I know that I like where you started, because it's like, this is not new. And I think Nate and I did this a number of times in UFO stuff, right? This isn't just people will say this space thing is a new, it's from since Roswell. And you go, not really, actually. The Vatican Library, according to a guest of ours, Dr. Diana Pasulka, who had access for her book, American Cosmic, said there's an entire section in the Vatican that chronicles UFO or extraterrestrial or these anomalies for the last 1,000 years. Right. And, and Nate, you also often reference, and we've done an episode on what happened in Nuremberg. So what I like what you're doing is we're dispelling this as some sort of, modern mythos or deception, modern phenomena, right? When in reality, we can look at our sort of modern microfiche, if you go back, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And you can find it in the 1800s. And then you go, well, how long has this been happening? And so I want to let you answer that, but start pull some of these threads for us and some of the trails you end up going down on what's been happening.
Yeah, I would say in the earlier times, the consistent theme was it was either attributed to kind of what I would call like a mythical creature, or they attributed it to the devil. That's really the common kind of culprit in these things. And so one example on the first side would be like chupacabra.
Right. I've heard that.
Which means goat sucker, right? Which is known for taking the blood of animals, right? And so so again, some societies, cultures go down that route and attribute that there's a creature that's doing this. And then when you go more, I guess, into Europe in the 19th century, they're connecting this to the essentially the fallen angelic realm. They're going right to Satan and saying that's what they were ascribing it to. And I would just say all the above, right? I mean, because even again with creatures, and I kind of spoke about this at the last conference I was at. So you have to understand that a spirit realm being can inhabit an animal, right? We see that in the Gospels, right? We see demons go into pigs. So the idea that a creature could actually be possessed by a demon or a fallen angel, there's a precedent for that in the Bible. So if you see a creature acting in and if you look at people who are possessed in the Bible, like the demoniac at the Gadarenes, they chain the guy and he's breaking the chain. He is supernaturally strong. There's another account in Acts where a guy fights seven men and they run out of the house naked. So could an animal take on supernatural strength when under a demonic or an angelic influence? I think absolutely, right? So I think so. That's why I say all the above, because I think ultimately they're probably all right in some way. There could be a creature's actually doing this, or an angelic being appearing, however they're appearing, committing these kind of acts.
It would seem though, like if it was a creature, right? And I think this is what gets so tough with this is that oftentimes, and I don't know, you be more of an expert having looked into this, but oftentimes what you hear about, as you said, is that it's what the original ground zero first first doctor talks about it being surgical in nature, almost laser cut. And when we look into you get these things, and they come across sort of the wire here. I think every once in a while you see these. I think there's one in Texas that you referenced earlier that I remember looking at. There was a pretty mass one, like where a ton of cattle were mutilated, and they were talking just about how no blood, precision, like surgical, almost cauterized.
That's kind of why I went there, because every time we look at what humans do, like a cheap version of it, like for instance, megalith building, there's the arc construction, and then there's this archaic ancient construction that's just so much better. There's, obviously humans can do crop circles, we can make them. And then there's the ones that they do, right? They're night and day. And the crops actually can come back but when humans, we destroy things, we break things, we cut things open, and you can see there's a human involved there. And then you can see this advanced technology that they possess in all these different rabbit holes that we go down. So that's kind of why I jumped there, is because you can, some of it is hoaxing, some of it is government, whatever, but not all of it. And that's where we're at a lot in the show, is like, what is this?
For sure. You like to skip and read the last page of the book, Nate. I know how I do.
I do. And I love tying it to the megalithic structures, because it's exactly the same, right? When you talk about the precision of taking these, multi-megaton stones and cutting them at perfect angles, it's the same exact probably technology, right? So I think that's a direct link to it. And if you want to go way, way back in terms of this concept,
the 80s?
A little earlier than the 80s.
You're talking about technology of the 80s. I thought they were going to get into like an NES rant right there.
Cassette tapes. Yeah, Walkman, baby.
Yeah, right. Let my tape rock till my tape pops. So you look again to ancient Hebrew, like Second Temple period, first century, second century Israel, and ancient Hebrew culture, right? They had this whole concept of Lilith or Lilith as this, who's actually referenced in the Bible, right? This idea of this, in the Bible, in the KJV, they call it a screech owl or a night creature in other versions, but the actual direct translation to Hebrew is Lilith, and the whole concept. And of course, there's now the modern understanding of Lilith is that she was the original wife of Adam, who was then rebelled and left, and eventually was kind of a mother of Nephilim, actually. So, but in ancient Hebrew belief, they believed that this was a demon that would come and consume blood and take blood, especially from children, to the point that women would actually, and they've found these amulets that women would wear to protect them from Lilith, so their children would not lose blood. And even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in a list of some documents have a list of monsters, and Lilith is listed there as well, and it's referenced, I think, in Isaiah chapter 34. So we're in a reference to a judgment where it says the satyrs will dance in the judgment of Edom, in a desolate place where you will find these creatures. It says, and Lilith will be there. So going way back.
Yeah, and actually, if you've seen I don't know, some people don't like this and some people do, but if you've watched The Chosen at all, they actually reference, Lilith with Mary Magdalene.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
interesting.
I think it's interesting how some of those things get pulled in. And people don't like.
I haven't made it that far.
Some people don't like that, but like that show. But I think it personally, I find it fascinating. It's just an idea that just put a story around the story. And anyway,
interesting. Yeah, Lilith is having a pop culture resurgence. So my other talk at the Prophecy Watch was on all the pop culture references to Genesis 6 and shows and movies and all those things. And it's my latest documentary, and I have a whole section about Lilith because there are so many shows that mention Lilith. I didn't know The Chosen though, so that's good to know. But comics, I think it was Supernatural has a Lilith character. The Sabrina, the Netflix Sabrina the Teenage Witch show has a Lilith on it. The show Lucifer on Netflix. There's also a show about a young woman who receives a heart transplant from a couple whose daughter died in a car accident, and she starts seeing what things the daughter saw. And you think it's going to be one of those kind of paranormal shows where, right, she's going to see memories that this other young woman had, and she's living it through her heart. But what it turns out in the end is that the parents actually belonged to a cult, and they were preparing their daughter to be possessed by Lilith in this ritual. And so now they're doing it with the woman who received the transplant. So
wow, nothing's new under the sun, Ryan. They're just
exactly
repackaging
exactly.
the old stories. They go down the old roads. It's wild.
So if we assume that, like, you know, and this is one of the arguments we make a lot when a lot of people on our channels get mad at us when we talk about specifics, right? We're always going for the data, all right? So when David Paulides came on and said, look, UFOs are not only out in the middle of nowhere, but they're taking elk with them, right? And there is something about elk hunters going disappearing as well within these UFOs. And his whole thing is like, look, here's all the data, here's all the science. These people are just up and vanishing. They're going from our realm to somewhere else. And I think a lot of Christians, it disrupts their core. It kind of, they don't know how to make sense of these things. But where we are on the show, it's like, clearly it's not animals, it's not humans. It's something is taking these people, and someone is taking these animals. Why are they taking animals, you think? Are they trying to create hybrids again? Are they trying to mess with our food supply? What are they doing, you think?
Yeah, I lean much more towards the hybridization program, right? That took place in the days of Noah, right? And you know, and I certainly believe that in Genesis 6, when it talks that when God says all flesh, the beasts, the animals, that they were mingling DNA, they were doing genetic experimentation on animals, right? And I think that, again, going back to Isaiah 34, where it mentions Lilith in that verse, it mentions the satyr, right? Which is a hybrid being, a half animal, half human being. And so I think that's what was taking place. So the two sort of benefits of abducting an animal are you have the blood and whatever they know they can do to, again, leverage the supernatural properties of it, but you also have the reproductive organs, which, again, I believe they are trying to bring back the days of Noah, to remove the veil altogether, to bring back the days when the angels were the gods and they were producing their own hybrid kingdom. And so, you know, and of course, this is going right back to scripture in Matthew 24, as it was in the days of Noah. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt, Jesus said we're going to return to that era. So all these things to me are just the preparation and precursors to it actually taking place.
We know a lot of the stuff is happening underground too. They're taking things down underground and they're messing around with it down there as well. Do you think that there is some sort of law where they can't necessarily do it on the surface of the earth or something, but they take it up into craft or whatever, and so they can get away with whatever they're doing, because it seems to be a hidden thing that's going on. It's not out in the open like it may have been in the days of Noah. I mean, I don't know what kind of labs they had back then or how they were making their chimeras, but it seems as though it's behind the scenes.
I think they're just doing it the old-fashioned way.
Don't think about that too much.
Yeah. No,
what does that mean? What does that even mean?
We'll leave it there.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting question too, and I think it's something we ponder, right? The idea that, you know, we know that God, when He sent the flood in order to cleanse the earth, it was He made a promise that He would never destroy the earth by water again. And we also know that, like, you know, as we talked about in our first couple episodes with you, Ryan, that the manner by which the giants returned, we know they did return. We have, you know, Goliath and his 4 brothers. There are giants in the land that Joshua, and the conquest of Joshua, requires them to vanquish per Yahweh and the dictate of, you know, Him using Israel as His judgment, as His instrument of judgment. And we know that they were there again. It doesn't really tell us again how it happened. It wasn't explicit as much as it was in Gen 6 when the Watchers took wives. And so I think that's an interesting idea, right? And something we've kicked around is are they, you know, sort of doing this off the ground, or per some legality? And you have quite a background in some law stuff, and we also know that supernatural, spiritual realm, whatever vernacular you want to use for that, operates very legally. We talked about Dr. Michael Heiser in our pre-roll, and one of the things fascinating things that he brought to light, and he was the first person to say that he didn't have any original ideas. That he just compiled. He was a researcher who compiled information. But his big aha was Psalm 82 and this idea of divine counsel. And then we look at things like Job and these different settings, which are definitely courtroom-esque, right? And so one of the things we sort of unpacked and uncovered in the show is the legality. And we talked to exorcists too, and they know this very well, that there is very much a legality to this. And so there's interesting ideas around, why things happen and if it's about legalities perhaps. But yeah, I'm curious on your thoughts on that. And then a follow-up to that, Ryan, my question is, why do you think cattle, of all things, like there's a lot of, maybe there are a lot of other things disappearing, and maybe it's just because they're such large animals and there's so many of them, that tends to be sort of the optics. But anyway, that's a twofold question. That's a lot.
Yeah, no worries. It's all good. These are great questions. So the legality part of it, yes. So much of, when you think about even basic concepts that every Christian can agree on, right? Of like the redemption, that Christ served as a ransom, that he's a substitutionary atonement. He's paying, all these ideas, he's paying our debt, right? These are all legal concepts. So I agree. I think that in the supernatural realm, the angels are under very strict regulation. And when they can actually reveal, engage, come into our realm and do things, it's all regulated by God. You already gave the example of Job, where obviously Satan was limited in what he could do at first. And then God gave him a little bit more leeway to actually directly harm Job's body, but not kill him, right? So I think all that is very regulated. And that's why they can't reveal themselves, right? Even Jesus, when he spoke to demons, said, don't tell anyone who I am. Right, he was even regulating them on earth, and they're like, "You're the Christ. You are the Son of God. I know exactly who you are." He says, "Don't tell anyone." And so, what they are permitted to reveal to our eyes and to our realm, I think, is very regulated, and I think that's why these things are being done off planet, right? Or on board a ship or vessel, because it is God's regulation and legality,
and that's always that's always what people describe. It's like they go up in some sort of medical, like room, and they're being experimented on. Sometimes they see multiple people up there. Sometimes pregnancies go missing. I mean, it's very much like a science lab in the sky or whatever.
Except it's not McDreamy. It's somebody else. Somebody else is operating.
It's definitely not McDreamy or McSteamy.
And here's something else I think might tie into this, is that this face peeler phenomenon that's going on. These faces are being taken off of people in places like Peru. Yeah. And it seems like it's around the glands. It's around the neck, the face. I think, we know that the Nephilim were eating human beings. Exactly. And we know that they drink the blood to stay young in a lot of these places, and they put certain things to stay young, and they use humans. It's like the Matrix. Humans we're farmed almost, and that's why they're so obsessed with children and young blood, little kids, and this and that. They use them in every way they possibly can. It's disgusting, but we know it's true. And so I think part of me thinks, like, Ryan, what we've learned is the kingdom of heaven echoes the kingdom of earth. So some of the things that we get involved in here, we get it from somewhere else. So exactly. If they're messing with humans the same way that we're messing with humans, it's like everyone's doing the same thing. It's just theirs is a much more advanced project or prototype of what we do.
Exactly. And God knows this, right? Because again, you go back to Genesis 9, right? Noah gets off the ark, and the first prohibition is do not drink blood, right? That's the first thing God tells Noah not to do. Yeah, do not drink blood, because the life is therein. So isn't that interesting? Because he's just coming out of being around how many millions of Nephilim giants who are drinking blood, right? So I think, they of course, they have higher science, they have higher mathematics, higher, architecture, all those things, right? We're it's almost like, if you think about it, it's like the fourth dimension, right? Each lower dimension is, like you said, it echoes. I see it as like a shadow, right? Like our shadow is just a 2-dimensional version of ourselves. And I believe that we in the realm now, we are the shadow of the supernatural realm, right? Because they're one extra dimension beyond us. So we're just doing a lower level of those things, right? And of course, God told Moses that, right? Everything, the tabernacle and the temple, of course, he says they are based on what he saw in heaven, right? And so I think when we look at what they're trying to do on that order in terms of like this surgery with precision in the sky, taking reproductive organs during an abduction phenomenon, all those things, it's a higher level of CRISPR, of all the things that we see in transhumanism and the life extension movement to genetically manipulate to make a superhuman or make an immortal human. And of course, ties in again with prophecy, in Daniel 2, and says, they shall mingle themselves in the final kingdom. It says they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. So we know again that I believe this is all in anticipation when God says, now you're permitted to do it. Because God is going to permit this thing he is going to permit it. He is going to say, now you can appear before them. You can now openly appear, right? The days of Noah were these beings, the gods on earth walking around, marrying women, fighting, destroying people, consuming blood. And so it's going to happen again in the Great Tribulation. This is just their preparation and trying to get as close as possible to that until the point that God says, now you're permitted to do it. And they go, just like we see when Satan goes and wreaks havoc in Job's life the minute God says you can do it.
What do you, when it says the life is in the blood, like, what do you think it really is in the blood? We interviewed our friend Trent, who had some wild stories, who's kind of was contracted by the government to go down into the dumbs and communicate with some of these extraterrestrial beings. And one of them said to him, blood is congealed light. You remember that?
Yeah,
Luke?
You said a lot of crazy things, but that was
blood
one thing you said, yeah.
Wow. I didn't know what to make of that. Like, congealed light. What does that even mean? Is there something in our blood that is beyond just the typical scientific explanation of plasma and red cells, and like, is there some sort of spiritual force in human blood, I guess?
I think it's the breath of life, right? I mean, God formed Adam, he made his body and he breathed into him. And then he said he became a living soul. And our blood carries the breath, right? Carries oxygen. So I think that is the supernatural property, right? It's passed down to every person, has the breath of life in them. And that is what is accessing and penetrating the veil into the supernatural realm. I believe it's that God has, we all carry that breath of life in us. And I think it's in the blood. And so when God says the life is in the blood, it's because he breathed that life into our original Father.
Do you believe that our blood changed maybe perhaps at the fall in the garden?
Definitely. Yes. Yeah. So we have just like our image, right? Where the image is corrupted, or we became corrupted in the sin in the fall, but we still have, I believe, that breath. Job references that, right? In the book of Job, he references it, just like it says that Seth, Adam's son, was made in his own image. So it's a lesser sinful image, right? But we inherit it, right? And if you think about it too, again, so much in scripture goes back to genetics. I mean, the Bible is basically a book of a genetic trail, right? The Old Testament is just a genetic trail from Adam to Jesus to Messiah. So, and I talk about even the idea that the sin nature, right, is itself is inherited, right? And this, the fact it says in Adam all die. Like, how is that possible? How is it possible that we die because of Adam? Because we've literally, in our body, in our genetics, in our blood, we have inherited our nature, our spiritual nature from him, right? And so I think that's how it crosses over. That's how blood crosses over, that it has a spiritual potential. And if you think about it, right, it takes the perfect blood of Christ to save our spirit, right? Again, it's like, why is the blood so important, the blood of Christ? Because there's a supernatural power, and in his blood, because it's obviously untainted by sin. And so that's what restores us back to eternal life. So, I mean, the idea too, that you think, right, that, and this just came into my mind. I should have said this in Norman, but it just came to my mind now. If you think about the idea that the shedding the blood of Jesus gives you immortality, right? That's a powerful concept. So, to think that there's that much power in blood, if the angelic realm has any inkling of that knowledge, why would why wouldn't you be trying to do whatever you can to unlock whatever power you can from whether it's a human's blood and a cow's blood and, whatever it might be. So, and as far as cattle, why cattle? I didn't finish your second question.
Thank you, Ryan. Look, you're a pro. You're a pro's pro. You're a pro's pro here. Yeah.
I did really try to get into that because, in Leviticus, they mention all sorts of animals, right? There's pigeons, turtle doves, lamb. There is cattle. The only thing I could really find outside the fact that cows have a lot of blood, they also interestingly have the intestines, they say, of cows can have more food than the average animal, the average large animal. They have tons of food in their intestines because obviously they have multiple stomachs. And so I just bring that up because when you talk about the fact that the bodies of these mutilated cows and cattle aren't mauled, they said they are prime targets for any scavenger animals because they have so much food inside their intestines. Yet when we see these cattle mutilations, usually their stomachs are completely untouched. They're not bitten. They're not gnawed open. Some animal hasn't bored their way in there. It's just the reproductive organs and the tongue and their eyes and other parts. So, but the only thing I could find was there is a warning to Israel. God says that he will send evil beasts against their cattle. That's actually a judgment that God promised Israel would happen if they were in sin. That was the only thing I could really find that specified cattle as being a target of these wild beasts. And again, wild beasts, when you go back to Isaiah 34, are used in the same passage that talks about Lilith, that talks about satyrs. It also mentions wild beasts. So I kind of said, is there some connection here between God saying, I'm going to send not wild animals, but beasts as in the supernatural beasts to come and judge to come destroy your cattle as a divine judgment. Evil beasts against the cattle.
Ryan, I was looking up when we were talking about, and just because I was thinking maybe it just has to do with saturation, right, or the number of cattle. 92.1 million cattle in the United States. We're just about 30 million are beef cattle. So we got a lot of steaks out there sitting around. What I think is fascinating, and I wanted to ask you about this is something that in the Skinwalker Ranch show, right? This is season 1, episode 7. This cow ends up dying, and I wonder how prevalent this is. But I've heard this is not an isolated incident where these things are killed and then they aren't fed on by scavengers. They aren't touched. The normal things, the flies, the insects, the bigger scavengers, so the vultures, the ravens, the crows, and even things like coyotes and the animals sort of as you go down sort of the hierarchy or up the hierarchy is where I'm going right now. They don't touch it. So something very bizarre happens to a lot of these, or at least a few, or a lot. I don't. That's what I was going to ask you. These mutilations where the animal kingdom, as it would, knows something. They don't touch it. It's something very, very odd and strange has happened to mutilated, killed animals.
They even say that some of these areas where the UFO touched down, nothing will grow there either.
There's something strange.
Yeah, exactly. And if you think too, right, this idea of going back to Nate, what you were saying about the rules in heaven echoing here, right? You have, again, with Samson, we mentioned Samson earlier, so that he should not touch anything that's dead, right? Yeah. So could that be a lower level of if there's something that's going through a ritual death that in the supernatural realm, they know don't touch it again once it's, organs have been removed? I don't know, but it seems like potential for that there's something in that ritual, surgery and organ removal and blood draining that it's so strong that the animal kingdom knows. That's what I was saying, because a cow has so much potential food for a scavenger in its intestines, yet they don't go anywhere near it. So
there's a lot of good beef there too, if you're gonna.
Absolutely.
I think the other thing I was curious, because, we talked about both your books, and in the Final Nephilim, you get into a lot of biblical prophecy, and what's to come, right? We talk about the golden age, what happened then and up to the flood, and then sort of looking forward as well, right? The things that were then never really stopped, they just sort of changed. It's like they got new marketing, right? And sort of play by new rules in some way, or different rules, if you will. Being really a student of eschatology in ancient Hebrew and the scripture, when you tie these together with this sort of phenomenon, something's going on, and as we tie it to the UFO phenomena and the angelic realm, and I think we're implying, and that's where Nate and I are as well, that a lot of what we believe, that a lot of this, the UAP, UFO phenomena has to do with the angelic race, or the whatever kind of vernacular you want to use around that, fallen angels, and the other, perhaps other supernatural, maybe not spiritual, because there's a lot of physicality, but supernatural beings that exist in that realm, in operating in our realm, right? But it's kind of from an eschatology standpoint, what are your thoughts? Do you think there is a tie to some of the things, and what do you think they're doing with a lot of the harvesting of blood, body parts, DNA, etc.? What do you think they're doing with a lot of this, and what do you think the end game is? Is this a Joel 2 army thing? Is this what is your best?
Yeah, so I connected to a couple of things. So one, I definitely think that, again, we're going to see an attempt to bring the Nephilim back in the end times, right? I think once the angels are manifesting, so I think that's a lot of it is trying to manipulate, and before, in the meantime, trying to get that done. But the ultimate, when we talk about this idea of the blood is going to be, I think, with the Antichrist and with the mark of the beast. Because I do think the mark of the beast is, beyond having an economic component, is going to have a genetic component. And, everything, it's like straight out of, science fiction, right? The Antichrist is holding himself up as the mirror image, the satanic mirror image of Christ, right? We talked about the fact that the blood of Christ saves us. And I think that ultimately what's going to happen is what's going to win the world over to the Antichrist is when he suffers a mortal wound and is healed. He's going to die and come back to life before everyone's eyes. They're going to see this. And that's when we see in Revelation 13:4, where it says, who is like the beast? Who can make war with him? That's when they're like, okay, this guy, this is it. He's God. He is the Messiah. No one can touch him. And I think that's the point where you can say, okay, well, if you take on my blood, you can be like me. You can overcome death like I can. And so the ultimate end game is to get the blood of the Antichrist into humanity. And it's doing the exact opposite, right? Christ is giving you blood for eternal life. The Antichrist is giving you blood for eternal damnation. And we see that in Revelation 14, where it says, if you take this mark, there is no turning back. There is no forgiveness, right? What would make God say something like that? Send an angel flying around the earth, announcing this vocally, visually. You can see this angel's telling the whole earth, don't do this, don't do this. Why that particular sin? Because I think it's actually going back to Genesis 6, where it's corrupting you, again, putting that spirit from the blood into you, making you something other than human, something other than the image bearer of God, and therefore disqualified from salvation. So I think that's to me, the ultimate end game of this whole blood genetic race, arms race we're in right now with the fallen realm. Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people, whether your views on Revelation are different, we have a much bigger audience now with various views on these things. But I think the reason I always sort of come back to your view is because we can see these themes repeating so many times. And a lot of people just have this hopeful thing, like everything's just going to get better one day. And I'm like, well, if you look at the data of what they're doing behind the scenes, that's really hard for a lot of Christians because they don't want to adopt more of a end times theology, because I think it makes them feel like, I don't have any hope. I'm sad. This is depressing. This already happened, or whatever their conclusion. But I think Luke and I are always trying to bang the drum of like, look, these weird phenomena are happening, and they've been happening since the dawn of time. So how it's going to play out, who knows? But the themes are probably going to be the same, because we've seen, like you said, the genetic part of the deception over and over and over again. And this cattle mutilation thing is crazy because just like we've heard people getting dumped out of craft, let's say someone comes in and does play a hoax. Well, how is this thing like falling out of the sky and almost embedded into the ground? We've heard stories of people getting dumped out of these. When people, get this, Ryan, who have had a vasectomy will get dumped out of UFOs. It's like, someone already tampered with these dudes, so they just drop them out of the.
they're no good.
Shooting blanks. Yeah, he's got nothing for empty gun.
And David Paulides said on our show, this is why shoes and clothing are folded nicely in the middle of nowhere. They don't want anything contaminating their ships. Yeah. They don't want clothes in there. Mm-hmm. They don't want shoes in there. They don't. So these items that people are wearing are just kind of scattered around in random places. So we're trying to piece all these clues together and say, not only is the spiritual realm a physical thing.
It is. Yeah.
And I think a lot of Christians have this just different view of it. It's not a physical thing. It's all deceptions. And I think we're just going through the data and trying to piece it all together of like, okay, it's more than a spiritual deception.
We haven't even mentioned the fact that you have numerous governments since you and I, the three of us have last spoken, have now come out with their own disclosure. Right. So, I mean, there's so many government. I mean, I wouldn't even say we're on the brink of disclosure. I mean, governments are just, you have government officials left and right are saying, yes, these beings are real. We have UFOs. We have biological evidence.
The Mexicans have a little mummy. If you saw that thing,
right? Exactly.
That's wild.
It's just,
who knows it's real?
Israel's government. I mean, it's all over. So it's.
I think what I'm trying to say is it's as intricate as if they're building iPhones in the sky. Obviously, humans build iPhones. They're building something even more advanced, but we're discovering this sort of factory where they're building things. It's that advanced. Our doing experience light years beyond our understanding, and. It's very specific experiments. It's not just tinkering around, taking an elk here or there. It's something really advanced is going on, you know?
Yeah. One of the things that I'm researching right now, because I'm looking, as I mentioned in the pre-roll, I'm researching now the original satanic rebellion before Adam and Eve. And I'm looking into this concept of man being made in the image of God. Let us make man in our image. And I'm taking that as in this time, we're going to make this creation in our image. So I don't believe the angels were made in God's image. And so maybe even in that, and this just came to me. So I'll make sure I give you guys a footnote in my book is that maybe part of the intense research into our DNA and reproductions to see if they can put that property of being made in God's image into their own genetics or into a host body that has that feeling. Because I believe that's something that's what I believe separates us from the fact that angels are more powerful. They're older, obviously, than us. But I think that distinction that God made is another thing that separates from us from them. And maybe that's part of what they're trying to research and or harvest for themselves.
Maybe they're trying to backdoor salvation that way.
Yeah, salvation or that spirit, that breath of God, right? That breath of life, or that, however, what God did that makes us in His image. So yeah,
I mean, I think it's interesting. That's a really interesting point. I mean, I think because one of the things, Nate, that we've talked about, what Tim Alberino wrote his book about was the idea that we have a birthright as humans, as sons of Adam, right? They allow us to rule here, and part of what was happening with Genesis 6 was that the progeny of the Watchers, the sons of the Watchers, were human enough to rule, to sit on the throne, and they could, by the legalities of the law of the ways that God set up Earth, right? And so I wonder if that's also not a way, right, to essentially to pull enough humanity that you can, by right, then rule. Because one of the interesting things Tim said, and it stuck with me, was that when they talked about who sat on they talked about the throne of Satan, and that being at the time it was the throne of the emperor of Rome, right, of the world, right. Rome was a known world, but Satan did not sit on that throne. The emperor did. He was human, right? And there's a very interesting concept there about just, and I think it falls into line we've talked about, the way that laws and precepts and legalities rule the heavenlies, and honestly, that's what we have here. Is I like the way you put it, as shadow, right? Like the kingdom of heaven is a kingdom, and we have kingdoms here, and and a lot of the things that we talk about in ancient megaliths, We've talked about heaven and there being walls and roads and these things that we hear about heaven, and that being, in some ways, you could even say, a more advanced civilization, right? This it's way ahead of us, and yet we are sort of a shadow of that. But we have laws, and we have a lot of the same things that I believe that God set forth in heaven. And I know that God gave a lot of laws to us because we needed them. We need to draw lines in the sand, and we as humans couldn't get out of our own way. And I understand that's part of it as well. But I think it's fascinating in the same way to think that I hadn't really thought about the way you put that, though, that perhaps they're trying to backdoor engineer humanity for the imago Dei, for the image. And in that becomes authority and also salvation, right? Which is, these are two very, whatever I did there made a bubble. I'll do it again.
Yeah, you opened a portal. It looked like. I think Tim is right. I think he's totally right with the birthright concept, which is an amazing concept. I know, and I think he hit the nail on the head. And I think what I connected to again with the Antichrist, I think, it's in some ways, at least for me personally, it's really astounding to me that Satan goes through literally thousands of years of history, warring, scheming, plotting. And when he gets to the penultimate episode, right, in his whole attempt to thwart God, and now we're in the Great Tribulation, again, he doesn't sit on the throne.
Right.
He puts the Antichrist on the throne. He gives the Antichrist his power.
The hybrid.
And Paul says, and great authority.
Hybrid son.
He sees it all. And I think that's why the Antichrist has to be a Nephilim. He has to be part human for that reason, because he has to have human genetics to legally have a legal claim to sit on the throne of the world. Exactly.
Dude, let's go. I do. Yeah. I think though, right? I mean, this is what, and maybe it harkens back to what you talked about in the beginning, and is that these things are such great pieces to understanding and unlocking the scriptures, and even unlocking what's happening around us. And in this case, we're talking about cattle mutilations and connections to UFOs and connections to, to our faith and to eschatology, and even to, ancient biblical history. And these things make sense. You go, why not just Satan showing up? Why does he not just do X, Y, Z, or why? And you go, wow, because God has set things in motion, and they are eternal and concrete, and you can't. They're unchanging, right? And so within that, even the darkness is trying to legally, find its way to sort of catch. I don't know who was on the show. It could have even been you. It said that like the darkness doesn't think they can win. They want to catch God on a technicality, right? And sort of forever delay the inevitable. And yet we see that's what it is, right? It's the Watchers took wives to have sons because they themselves couldn't rule. They had to have rule by proxy. And
right.
And I think the cattle mutilation thing is fascinating because I feel like the more that we talk about it, the more things make sense. But then you still are like, I don't know. Like are other animals going missing? Like, I know people are, and some return, right? At least we know. So that's the other thing that's really wild to think about, right? Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, Ryan, one thought that I had when you were talking about Job and what your previous just rant there was. A lot of times I think that human beings, if some of these entities are real, the fact that we are still able to live here pretty much untouched by these other realms for now is these laws, is these rules. Because if this stuff exists and it's just, it comes and goes and does what it wants, yet it really can't mess with us to a certain degree. There's some legality issue of why everyone isn't just, because a lot of these ancient alien types and these other groups who think all this stuff is real, I'm like, well, what's keeping them at bay? What laws are they observing? Because they are observing laws. Whose laws?
Yeah.
Because why are we even still here if they can just do all these things?
Exactly. It's all the laws and regulations. And if you think about it too, part of it, I think God is holding a trial, right? Why is Satan even allowed to go to heaven? What's going on with that? Why is Satan allowed to actually still go to heaven and stand before God's throne and just speak to him and bargain and negotiate? Because I think God is showing, I'm going to put my way on trial and the devil's way on trial. I'm going to prove my case to the angelic realm, right? Because we're told in the New Testament says that our salvation is something that angels look into. They want to know what's going on. So I believe God is demonstrating by using humanity to show, I'm going to show that my way in the end was always right. And I'm going to make this whole new creation that doesn't have any of the advantages you have. They can't see me. They're not in heaven. They don't have the powers you have. They don't have the wisdom you have. And despite all of that, they're still going to grope through the darkness and come find me and choose me. And so I think a lot of this goes back to what's ultimately happening and showing that no matter what, Satan will always just do evil and destroy things. So that's all that's holding it back is God's legality. Because all you have to do is look to the sixth trumpet, right? When you have this, I believe, angelic army. Many people think it's China or something of that nature. I think it's a supernatural army, and it wipes out a third of the population just in one sentence. Because that's the damage, that's the power that these beings have. That's the damage they can inflict. So God's holding it all back, and that's why they haven't struck yet. Because it's all God's legality as he works through this process to redeem us and prove His way. I believe to the angelic realm.
I love it. I think it's important because I think we are in a time when mass conformity is a very easy thing, and people need to understand that, what the image that you were created in is something that they're always after. And we have to be mindful of our image and mindful of the way that God created us, especially with crazy psyops abound and more propaganda is being pumped down our throats about everything. Taking a stand and saying, this isn't, I'm not going to get in line all the time for all these agendas. And I think that obviously that can open up another can of worms. And you did tease talking about Samson, which I've been wanting to talk about for 3 years on this show. Like, what is going on there? And you just got to drop those little nuggets and then let's keep going. Let's talk about something else. I'm like, dang it, I want to talk about that. Luke wants to talk about Samson's hair so bad, Ryan. You don't even know.
It's biblical that with great lettuce comes great strength. It's not a hard and fast law. We're talking about legalities, but there is precedent. So,
I mean, what was that hair like? I mean, it's interesting though that he couldn't touch a dead animal. I really didn't think about that.
It sounds like another episode.
It's like.
Point.
We could do a great episode on Samson.
We're going to put that.
I think I have some theories that people have not heard before on this.
We're lining up. So this is a preview, everyone. At some point, we're line up with this Ryan. And Ryan, on that note, we pre-roll, you tease us a little bit, but always want to, always like to share with people what you've got going on, what you're working on. And I know you're heading into a heavy research phase here, but you are working on a book on the pre-Adamic idea. And I'm going to leave it there and let you talk about it, because I think this will be a good teaser for people, because as I said in our, before we started the episode, our conversations, it's something that's very fascinating to me personally. And I'm very excited to have an episode on at some point, because there's so many questions that come up, I think, on our channels and different places, even in this space and even in the church space about, what was happening then. Cain gets kicked out, and God's got to put a mark on him so he doesn't get killed in their cities and all these things. And there's a lot of explanations for that, and people are comfortable with a lot of that in it being just time or whatever else, right? But there's a lot of interesting wording in the Bible that points to, and then also just sort of in our geological history and everything else, as you look around, that perhaps there was more there the Bible just doesn't touch on necessarily. Or it just doesn't touch on heavily. And so, again, I was going to let you talk about it, but we just want to let you share what kind of things you're working on and things you're doing. Yes, and I know you do a lot of cool stuff online as well with, theology live streams and all the above. But
it's all coming back. I'm grinding this month, and I'm going to come really with a lot of new content in January. Okay. So I'm excited. So so the book on the pre-Adamic world is just that, right? So what I like to do is, when I think of the biggest, and this is the blessing of God, right? Because I grew up in my adult life living in the city, in New York City, with lots of people who are very intelligent people who wanted to have spirited debates about the Bible, who do not believe the Bible. And when I look at the biggest obstacles for so many people were the flood, the wars in Canaan, right, and the age of the earth, right? Where people said, there's no way. Look at the geological record. Look at the fact that if a star is 20,000 light years away, when we see it, that means that light has traveled for 20,000 years to reach us if we're looking at a star, right? There are many scientific things that are right in front of our eyes, and that's been a big stumbling block for many people. And I don't believe the Bible teaches a young Earth model. And so that's one big motivation, right? I want to knock down the biggest obstacles that people have to say, oh, I won't believe the Bible. I won't even give it a look.
Are you saying the Earth has gray hairs in his beard?
Absolutely.
So we just
that's absolutely what I'm saying. Yeah, I wish I could grow a beard like you guys.
It's not too old, but it's not too young. Yeah, just right.
Yeah. So I'm definitely don't ascribe to a young Earth model, and the Bible never says the age of the Earth, right? And so so basically, it's focusing on in between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2.
It's possible to have both, right? You could have young creation and an old Earth. Oh, right.
Absolutely. Humanity certainly, I believe, is roughly 6,000 to 7,000 years on Earth. However, the Earth and the original inhabitants of the Earth predate that, and that's what I'm going to talk about.
That's what you want to get into.
Exactly, and the original Satanic Rebellion, and of course we look into
is that Bigfoot?
Oh boy!
Bigfoot?
Let him talk about his book. Let him talk about his book. Right?
Sorry.
Yeah, I believe that the angels were on Earth first, right, and that's where the original Satanic Rebellion happened, and that's how Satan. We talk about birthright and dominion originally. Had the dominion over Earth before it was given to Adam, and that whole history. Why does Satan just show up evil, right? In Genesis 3, he's already bad. He's tempting Eve. And of course we can look to passages like Ezekiel 28, where it talks about Satan in this righteous time role, serving God in the Garden of Eden, right? Wearing the jewels. It says every precious jewel is like covering, the sardius, topaz, carbuncle, 9 jewels. There was 9 of the 12 that Aaron wore as the high priest on his breastplate, right? So he was serving in this priestly role. So it gets into all of those things and really explains it and the importance in the scripture. And also, of course, I get into the history that this was, again, like the Nephilim, the common understanding, certainly in the ancient Hebrew world, absolutely. But even in the ancient church, the 1st and 2nd century church, that was the common understanding that there was this, what's known as the gap theory or ruin or reconstruction, where the angelic rebellion happened. And when we see Genesis 1 verse 2, and the earth is covered in water and says darkness over the face of the deep, that was the first flood. That was the first flood judgment that God put on the earth. And I even just looking at some of the comparisons between Genesis 1-2 and Genesis 6, there's so many similarities, right? Obviously you have a flood. It says that, you have, it says the Spirit of God went over the waters. The Holy Spirit was going over the waters that came from the deep, right? This is where the flood waters came from. They came from the deep and the windows of heaven. In Noah's day, you have the Holy Spirit over the waters, and then God says, let there be light. Noah knew to get off the ark because he let a dove out flying, hovering over the waters. And that's when he knew now he can come into this new earth because the dove came back. So, right? So you have a sin involving fruit, right? Adam partakes of the fruit that was forbidden. Noah drinks fruits of the vine, gets drunk, and gets caught up in the tent with Canaan, right? So you have animals supernaturally obeying God. God sends the animals to Adam to name all the animals. He sends all the animals to Noah to get on the ark, right? So there's lots and lots of parallels. I think the Bible's telling us, again, this is a repetition. The earth was judged in Genesis 1, and God is
look at you, Ryan.
Renovating.
Look at you, Ryan Pitterson. Look at you. I love this. Listen, I can't wait to read this. Nate might actually. Nate's a big coloring book guy, but we might actually get him to read a book this time.
Well, I'm doing children's books too, so I got that coming out too next year. All right, for real, man. I'm doing a children's book series, but lots of stuff coming out. So I'm doing that. I'm doing a children's book series. Bible series. I'm very happy to announce that this is my first time announcing this, that for all of my Spanish speaking followers and subscribers and readers, I've been asked so many times, the Spanish version of Judgment of the Nephilim is coming out as well. It's actually done. I'm just getting it formatted. So there's been I've got many, many requests over the years for that. So that's coming out. Oh yeah. And I'm also doing Judgment of the Nephilim in a graphic novel format.
Let's go.
Sweet.
Busy man.
I was a youth leader in New York for 10 years. So kids and teens have always been a passion of mine before I ever had kids. Yeah. And I just told, my wife, who's kind of like my creative partner, I'm like, I got to do something my content, as you guys know, is a little heavy for a child to read. So I'm like, I got to do something that's going to target teens, that a teenager would read, that I would read if I was a teen. I loved graphic novels. I was a huge comic book fan. I had hundreds and hundreds of comics. So I want to take the Days of Noah, the Fallen Angels. I want to put it all in a graphic novel form. And so a teenager would grab it and really dig into it. Some scripture.
I love it. I love it. And I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's all good.
Because, all those topics are fascinating. And we've been wanting to talk about it a lot on the show, which is great that you can come back on, because we've had people hint at it. And a lot of people ask us questions about, like you said, there's this pre-Adamite vibe going on, and a lot of Christians don't know what to think about those kind of concepts. But we do know that it feels very much like the Bible is kind of like Star Wars. It starts sort of in the middle, and then it sort of... George Lucas blew it and went back and tried to tell that story. But, we're an 80s show. We talk about this, and that's kind of how it starts.
That's it.
And I think that's
New Hope, episode 4. We were literally starting in episode 4. It's exactly what it is. It's a beautiful analogy. But I'm going to do a much better prequel saga, so don't worry about it. I got you.
Yes. Thank you for having good taste in movies as well. That's an important thing on this show.
I hate sand.
And a lot of people not only start at episode 4, they start at the second half of episode 4. They just go right to the New Testament, and they don't understand the Old Testament. And I think that we've done a lot of work on this show to make sense of the Old Testament. Like it's as crazy as you can imagine, and the wildest stuff happens. And we appreciate guys like you that have put time and effort into the research and bring the Old Testament to life and say, hey, it was messy and it was crazy, but it happened. Here's why it happened. And here's some of these themes that keep coming down, specifically genetics. All our listeners go out and get Ryan's book, Judgment of the Nephilim. You got a bunch of books out now. And follow you on, and then social media. I know you're on Instagram.
So my website's judgmentofthenephilim.com. The books are there. I got study guides, documentaries, all that good stuff. Also my Instagram, my Facebook, and my YouTube are all Judgment of the Nephilim, one word. So you can find me there. Like I said, I have lots of content up there. I have 2 7-part series on the Nephilim. I have stuff on end times. I did Thursday Night Theology show for a year where we cover any topic under the sun. So check it out. Feel free to DM me, send me questions. Always glad to answer.
Thanks, Ryan.
We always tease with another episode. So we got Samson,
man,
it's gonna blow people's minds. Trust me, I have a very unique theory.
Okay, we're gonna get you back on the schedule, Ryan. Yeah, we are. I appreciate that. Well, thanks, man. So good to see you, and thanks to Erica as well for being really, really gracious with all of our switching and moving of this. So we appreciate you spending time.
It's all good.
It's great to see your face too. We need to make it not almost 100 episodes between.
Exactly.
No, we'll get this one on the book. We're
figuring things out. We're starting to get organized, bro.
You guys are leveling up. Look at you guys. You guys are leveling up. I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys having me on. And it's been 100 episodes because you guys have just done such a phenomenal job. Thanks, seriously. Man. So I'm like blown away. Man. Keep doing it. It's a huge. I'm seeing the impact. So like I said, you guys are picking up the baton for some heavy hitters in bringing people who are into the paranormal and the supernatural, but not so much into the Bible, and getting them into it. Awesome. So it's amazing work. So keep it up, bro. And look forward to coming back on,
brother. Yeah.
Let's go.
No, appreciate you.
All right, man.
Thanks, man.
God bless.